Hi, Jeff Merrill from JMYS, back again with my good friend Steve D'Antonio. We've filmed 2 other previous editions of Conversations. After we filmed them, we got to talking. We're on a little retreat, getaway business trip together, and first time we can really talk and just sit down and relax without having phone calls and emails and people on the dock and the general interruptions and distractions that give us our livelihood. So Steve and I were talking about those first 2 episodes, and one of the things that we really didn't talk about, really didn't cover, was what it's like to actually use a boat, what it's like to go cruising on a trawler. We talked about how you can involve Steve to determine which is the right boat for you and have him help you spec out a new boat or evaluate a used boat. But there's a lot more to just finding out the boat. You're doing all of this so that you can go out and enjoy it. Steve and I have both been very fortunate to be involved with hundreds of people, Sail and Power, helping them with their boats. And we both make it a point to try to get out and go cruising with our clients or with friends in the industry. So I'm going to just kick it over to Steve for a second and let him, why don't you tell us about one of your favorite trips with a client? You've done some pretty amazing ones. It can be hard to narrow it down.
Yeah, I've had some golden opportunities really to evaluate the things that I'm recommending, and I hate the idea of helping people choose a boat or build a boat and detail the specifications and equipment and the design and construction of the boat without actually doing what they're going to do. So I do make it a point to get out and do passages as often as I can, and I have a passion for high-latitude passage making, and as it happens, those are really the sort of the best test for a cruising vessel and its systems, because weather conditions are often less than benign, let's say, and so it really puts all of the systems to the ultimate test. And if something's not going to work right, I really want to know about it. And if things do work right, and I hope most of them do on boats that I'm involved with, I want to know about that too, so I can recommend those products and that equipment and those installation guidelines with confidence and
first-hand experience.
Yes, rather than saying, "Oh, I've read about this," or "I understand the specifications." I want to be able to say,
theory,
"No, I actually used
works,
it." Yeah. So for me, again, having a passion for high latitudes and being an Arctic and Antarctic enthusiast, I've had the opportunity to cruise in Newfoundland, Greenland, Iceland, Norway, the Faroe Islands, and ultimately Svalbard, which is an island group that is north of Norway. It's the northernmost continuously inhabited settlement in the world, actually. And I made a month-long passage there aboard a vessel that I helped with the build on. And we had the opportunity to go into the ice pack and cruise to within 600 miles of the North Pole. Really, not your average cruising by any means.
Call that remote.
Yeah. But again, really puts the vessel and the systems and the crew, I'll add, to the test. And I'm happy to report that vessel performed very well, as have the other vessels that I've cruised on.
Well, let me stop you there for a second. I mean, this is graduate level, advanced degree cruising. You don't just buy a boat, even though the boat's designed and is capable for it, and go up to the North Pole and see narwhals and polar bears and do all that. And I would like to say that of the 5 or 6 places you mentioned, I've never been to any of them. I'm more of an equator, tropical island, sandy beaches, cold drink in the evening type of cruiser. But the part of what I think we enjoy doing when I sell a boat, help someone buy a boat, I really don't do any selling. I'm helping people connect with the right boat. But our team really loves to spend time with the clients after they've purchased the boat and make sure they're comfortable with it. It's pretty easy as a broker to close the deal, go on to the next one, hand the keys off, and figure it out on your own. We don't like to do that. We stay in touch by phone and by email, and I found it's more valuable to our clients if they've owned the boat for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, figured out the basic, obvious house-related types of things, and then we try to block off a couple of days in advance, fly out and say, what would you like to practice? Or are you good with docking, good with anchoring? I did a video recently, in 2020, with some clients of a Nordhaven 50. Now, you were involved in that deal with me. We surveyed the boat together, and the people bought the boat. Now, they ended up getting some training from one of our friends, mutual friends, Bernie Francis, to get their insurance coverage. But their desire was for me to join them for a trip to get their Nordhaven 50 out of Florida and up to North Carolina. So I did an offshore underway video on that, on the boat Granuel, and with Neil and Kathleen. And that was fantastic because they had never been underway offshore overnight. I've done it a lot, and it's really much more comforting if you do it with somebody who has done that before. It's really not that big of a deal, but if you haven't done it. Now, this gets back to the baby steps I was talking about. And once you have the boat, whether it's a new boat or a used boat, there are a lot of systems you need to understand. There are a lot of spare parts you need to collect, as well as tools. And I think the baby steps is really the best way to describe it. You want to really get familiar with your boat, a lot of different sounds and noises. You need to figure out what the consumables are, the servicing items. If you have pencils, inks, and filters and belts, all these types of systems that do require regular attention, and do some short trips, local trips. Maybe you do your first overnight passage and build up your experience and confidence to be able to do these longer trips.
Well, I concur with all of that, Jeff. And one of the services that I do offer is to help clients familiarize themselves with the vessel systems. During the purchase process, or even during the build process, that is overwhelming to virtually everyone. And, unless you've done it, several times before, understanding all of those systems in that short amount of time that you're introduced to the boat, when it's during the survey process or during the commissioning process, it's very difficult to absorb that information in a meaningful way. But after they've had it for some period of time, weeks, sometimes months, I'll often then revisit with them for 2 days and go through the entire vessel with them and talk about every single system on the boat, explain what common failure modes are, how to avoid them, how to fix them should they fail, what tools and spare parts they should have on board, and just other common wisdom about those
what to
systems.
look out for. There's some common things. If you start hearing something different, well, something's changed. Is that a bad deal? Rattling sounds and vibrations,
or smells, or
you become one with the boat. When we do passages, one of the things I like to try to remember to tell people is that when you are on watch by yourself at night, everybody else is sleeping. If you need to get everybody up to the pilot house, if there's an issue that requires more than one brain to help solve it, you change the RPM. When you are on a boat and you are cruising and you're into it for several hours or a couple of days, you really mostly pick a sweet spot RPM and you just stick on that. And it's amazing how quickly your body tunes into that. And when it changes, you immediately sense something is different. And that's a nice way to get people up to the pilot house. If someone's doing an engine room check and you notice something and you want them out of the engine room, turning off the lights probably wouldn't be a very good idea because they need to be able to see. So you adjust the RPMs and get them up there. We collaborated on a list of maintenance guidelines and recommendations. And it's a Word document, a couple pages long, which we would like to offer to anybody watching this video. If you'd like to get a copy, send an email to me, jeff@jmys.com, and in the subject line, put SDMC/JMYS list. And I will then send that to you so you can see it. There will be some links on there. That's why I'm going to send it to you as a Word document. Just some good general things to be thinking about, whether you are considering buying a boat or you already have a boat. I think you'll find this a very helpful document. So happy to share that with you.
And we can add to it a recently published article that I wrote and put out on my website just a few weeks ago is entitled Engine Room Checks. What do you do for an engine room check underway? That's a question that I get all the time, and those when I get the same question several times, that's usually there's
a need for an explanation,
inspiration for an article, so they don't have to explain it verbally. So that'll be included in that document.
Let's remind people what your website is.
It's stevedmarine.com. Quite simple. There's a link there to send emails if you want to. You can also sign up for the
You've got a great newsletter.
Twice a month newsletter, and just to be clear about this. We never share that mailing list with anybody. We're very sensitive about not abusing it. So you will very, very rarely get more than 2 emails a month from us. If there's something special, if I'm doing a presentation or a video that you might want to sign up for, we might send out an email blast about that. But for the most part, we're really respectful. I know my inbox is overloaded, so I'm really sensitive to that, and I don't want anybody who signs up for it to feel like they're going to get bombarded with emails.
We do the same on JMYS. We have a newsletter as well. But Steve's website is an amazing resource. And if you're watching this, you're internet savvy to some extent, and you are doing your research. You're trying to find out as much as you can about the right boat and the right systems and how to operate it. And there are a number of blogs out there. Blogs seem to have kind of been replaced by videos. YouTube, a very popular place, but also going to websites. So the Steve's website and the JMYS.com website, a lot of articles there, a lot of information and other details that might help you be better prepared or even add some experience to those of you who are already familiar with it. We have both been involved with clients who have never had a boat before, and they're buying over $1 million boat, and it's a radical lifestyle to just adopt without any sort of background. Now, many of the people have an aviation background, or they've driven RVs, which is kind of similar to handling a boat. But you have to start somewhere, and you have to slowly build up to that. So, tell me about another trip that you went. You've got a friend who builds probably the prettiest boats in the world, in my opinion. If I can have one, Tony Fleming. Yes,
yep. I've done several trips with Tony, and I'm happy to say he's a great shipmate. He's somebody that I've spent a lot of time with in the pilot house underway, and I've written articles about him and the boats that he builds. I'm again proud to say that we're friends. I cruised from Scotland to the Faroe Islands and then to Iceland aboard Venture 2, which was a Fleming 65 that he had built, and I've made 2 passages in Alaska with him, one to Prince William Sound and another one to the Aleutian Islands. All of those were, wonderful passages. Tony is, a fellow photography enthusiast and a bird lover like me, and so it's a lot of fun to be with somebody who shares those same interests and pursues them. To go to places, to see things that are worth photographing and writing about. Everything from grizzly bears to dolphins, and whales, and everything in between. And so those passages to me, are among my favorite. I've done many, and I love remote places and high latitudes. But to be with somebody again who has many of the same interests, that's especially enjoyable.
Well, Tony is fantastic with his videos. He has a wonderful YouTube channel, and his voice is mesmerizing. He is a great narrator. You feel like you're watching a television show, and he is articulate, eloquent, smooth, and informative. So there's a lot of good information there that I think people will enjoy. We'll put his link right here so you can see how to get to Tony's videos.
Yeah, that and probably the the Svalbard expedition, I'll call it, because that was quite an undertaking. That was aboard a Nordhaven 68, again a vessel I helped build.
We worked on that boat together.
We did, that's right. Shared client, and that was a passage that departed from northern Norway, and may qualify as the most unpleasant and arduous and tumultuous 2 days of passage making I've ever endured. When I'm sitting in the pilot house and the bow is stuffing itself into wave after wave, and I'm not embarrassed to say I get seasick, and I like to say I have a bad memory because I keep going back to sea even after I'm out there and say what am I doing here? But on that passage, it was truly an ultimate test for the boat. It really beat the living daylights out of the boat, and nothing failed. And that boat was well proven at that point. It had thousands of hours on it.
I was hoping you'd mention the hours, because people who are looking at boats look at the price naturally and look at the year or the age, but they also look at the hours. Those are 3 common numbers that someone looks at to evaluate a boat. And a boat that has a continuous duty rated engine, which is what most of these expensive long range trawlers have, those engines are designed to run
20,000 hours.
Yeah, 20,000 hours. And so you see one for sale with 8,000 hours, like this boat we were talking about. It was recently for sale, and you kind of take a step back. But I think it's more important to understand that these engines are designed to do that, and the people who have put that many hours on them had to have done a pretty good job of looking after things to keep the engine working that well. And the maintenance and service records really do tell the story about how they've been looking after it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and especially for a boat like that has traveled to very remote places where there is no help. I mean, that you can have an EPIRB and they may save you, but if you have a breakdown, there's really very little opportunity to get help in many of those places. And I tell clients and lecture attendees and readers, if you're cruising on the East Coast, you're in a safety net that is pretty unprecedented. There aren't a lot of other places in the world where you can cruise inshore and offshore and have access to so much support and assistance and technical guidance and boat yards and travel lifts and specialists, etc.
Within 100 miles from shore, you really aren't too far away from help.
But you leave that safety net, and now you are far more on your own, and you have to be far more self-sufficient. And one of the things that's attractive to people about these boats is the idea of being an island unto yourself and being fully self-sufficient. Well, that brings with it a responsibility of having the right spare parts, the right tools, and the right expertise. And I, again, emphasize this with people who are buying these boats when they say, our plans are to cross the Atlantic. We want to go to Bermuda and the Azores and then Europe and or South Pacific. And I say, that's great. The boats are fully designed for this.
Right.
They're capable of it, but you've really got to be prepared as an individual or a crew to take care of the boat, to husband the vessel, because it is a collection of very complicated systems. We can talk about simplicity all day long. The bottom line is these boats are not simple, and they never will be. It's virtually impossible to do that with the types of systems that they have on board. Simplicity is simply not not possible. Now, you don't need to make them unnecessarily complex.
Oh, and you don't need to be an engineer to operate them. I don't want to give you the wrong idea, but you do have to be familiar.
And you have to be willing to learn the skills and learn how to use a multimeter.
Get your hands on it.
Nobody who runs a boat like this who isn't going to have crew should have no familiarity with the multimeter. That is an important tool, probably maybe one of the most important tools to understand and be able to use. And if you don't have one, or you have it and don't know how to use it, getting somebody to teach you how to use it, getting a book, teaching yourself to some extent, but learning as well from a professional is immensely important, in my opinion. And part of this is you want to enjoy cruising. You want to have a sense of confidence that for average everyday failures, which are going to happen on the boat on a regular basis, that's not going to create an anxiety level that takes the enjoyment out of cruising. Part of this is the right mindset, the right attitude, which is, hey, when problems come along, it's going to be a challenge. I'm going to figure it out. You'll only get to that by having the right knowledge and the right tools. You'll never get there if you don't have that foundation, and it will be cruising from boatyard to boatyard, or from station to help station, and that's no fun at all. Nobody really wants to do that. And if you're going to be offshore, if you're going to make longer passages, you don't have that option. You really need to be the one to do that. So you need to be the onboard engineer. And again, as Jeff said, you don't need to be an engineer technically. I'm not. I don't have an engineering degree. Anybody who's willing can learn how to maintain these systems. And I will use this opportunity to say this as well. Some boat builders do this better than others. Okay, so you can have a complex boat that is logically laid out and has really good documentation, schematics for everything, for electrical, for raw water plumbing, freshwater plumbing, heating and air conditioning systems. Boat builders that spend the time and the money to thoroughly document the systems on the boat, in my opinion, make life much easier for the owners and those who are working on the boat. A lot of builders don't do that, I'm sorry to say. They don't spend the time on a really good owner's manual or set of owner's manuals, and they don't spend the time on the technical documentation like schematics. And that's a window to the soul of the boat builder in some ways. It's telling you something about that builder, but it's also something that you need to be aware of as a boat buyer. That if you're vetting brands, include that in your list of things that you're
if you're
evaluating.
building a production boat, we've mentioned Fleming and we've talked about Nordhaven, two companies who build wonderful boats and support them with excellent manuals. A one-off boat builder or someone who's building one or two boats a year, which could build a fantastic boat, doesn't necessarily or doesn't typically have the resources to put together those types of things.
I don't disagree with that, but that's even true of many production builders. They do not expend the resources, time, and money into making really good documentation. It's expensive to do that. To have all that information that is accurate and available to the boat owner. If you're buying a new boat or even a used boat that's coming with all of that. So again, that's one of the things you should be asking about. And one of the articles that we'll include in that document is what I call the top 10 list of things that you should use as a pre-evaluation list for considering vessels. It's an article that's on my website, and we'll include the link to it. But support, is one of those. Is the builder the type of builder that provides what's needed to support that vessel.
Kadey-Krogen does a very good job with their manuals as well.
Yeah.
And it is important. You need to understand that book and where to find things before you go offshore and trace down some of the systems on the diagrams to see where that vented loop is or where those zincs are, where the through holes are. Very important to understand all that. Mm-hmm. It's really fun to understand your boat and to not only pay for it and own it, but to be able to operate it and be comfortable that you know what you're doing. You don't have to learn everything. I would never want to touch the valves on an engine. That's just not what I do.
I agree.
But I feel like if there's a problem with an engine, it's most likely fuel or air or cooling or electricity. So, I can just sort of try to diagnose things independently one at a time. When you're out in the middle of the ocean, you do have a little bit of time, but when you are without propulsion, it's a little bit bumpy.
And other key systems like steering, watertight integrity. Again, on that passage to Svalbard, when we were in really terrible conditions, on my watch, what's going through my head is what's the steering system like on this boat? What's the hull to deck joint like on this boat? What's the shaft and shaft log and stuffing box and coupling and transmission, motor mounts? All of that plays, clearly a very important role in the reliability, the seaworthiness, reliability, and safety, once again, for that vessel. And in, calm conditions, benign conditions, that's when that stuff's not going to fail. It's going to fail under the worst conditions typically. And in those conditions, a steering failure could cause the loss of the vessel, because if you turn beam to seize and you have no way to, to control the vessel, you could really be in very serious trouble. So when I inspect vessels, new and used, I look very carefully at steering, because I know that people's lives will depend on it, maybe mine if I'm cruising on that boat, especially in conditions that are, tumultuous. And that could mean you're just coming through, Port Everglades Inlet, on a windy day, and you've got rock jetties on either side. Yeah, and a failure of steering means you're on a rock jetty within a minute or two, or in front of a cruise ship or something like that. So again, those systems clearly are very important to the seaworthiness.
You could use the analogy of a car too. A car has to have the electricity and the propulsion and the steering and the brakes. I would say one of the most important things that you need to be comfortable with is anchoring. That's how you stop a boat. And not in the middle of the ocean, but certainly when you're doing more of the coastal stuff, learning how to set an anchor is a very good skill to continually refine and get better and understand your ground tackle and how you're going to mark your chain and how you can cut it away safely if you have to leave that anchorage or that mooring position to clear the boat from impending doom, which has happened before, where other boats come running down onto you when you're set. So not to scare anybody, but these are things that you kind of have to go through your head and think about. What could go wrong, and what do I need to do to prepare for that? Or if this happened, what would be my solution? And it's interesting conversation to have with other fellow cruisers. And I like to ask people, what's the biggest surprise on your boat, or what type of things have happened that you really didn't expect? And it's mostly good things and family memories and great experiences, but you do learn a little bit from other cruisers. Our mutual friend Bob Center likes to say something like, anytime you have a failure, you have a unique learning experience, and it's an opportunity to learn something new. But if you have the tools and you have the spares, that's pretty easier, or a lot easier to address.
Ernest Shackleton said, "Adventure is another word for poor planning." And in those days, adventure had a slightly different meaning than it does now. But and my goal is for cruisers is to avoid as many problems as possible with preemptive and predictive maintenance, rather than knowing how to fix it. I mean, you should know both, of course, but I'd rather you prevent failures, and in nearly every case that is possible. With the exception of spontaneous internal engine failures that you could have done nothing about, and other things like that.
Some things are beyond your control and just bad luck.
Many failures that I see are fully avoidable, and a lot of it has to do with, as I said in our previous discussion, being familiar with your own boat. Just minutes ago, I was making a post on a forum about a boat that I went aboard that was 2 years old, one owner, to do a pre-purchase inspection for my client, and I took the enclosure off the generator, and I looked in and was sort of puzzled by what I was seeing initially, and I realized what it was 2 inches of salt had accumulated in the entire bottom pan of the generator because it had a salt water leak, and that went on for months, obviously.
That's not an overnight thing.
No, the water was evaporating and the salt was accumulating, so that told me that owner never took the enclosure off the generator. That's a terrible, sort of faux pas for any vessel operator to not look at his or her equipment on a regular basis. And I even tell people, leave the service side of the generator enclosure off if it's in an engine room, because the engine room is probably well insulated enough that you'll never notice the difference in noise. And it means every time you walk past that generator, you'll do a casual inspection on it.
At least glance there, yeah.
So you'll see a fuel leak possibly, you'll see a chafing hose or wire, or a loose hose clamp or a leak. And if it's covered and if you walk by it, you're not going to have that opportunity. So and I apply that to a lot of things. I don't like to cover up equipment on boats for that reason. So manufacturers that cover everything,
which looks nice and neat and tidy, but you don't have the access. You need the serviceability and the access. I agree with you. I would say one very important skill that you should have is changing an impeller. You need to understand your fuel system, supply and return, transferring fuel. Most of the engine stops that I've been aware of have to do with fuel supply being shut off unintentionally to the engine. The engine only has whatever fuel is in there, and then it runs out. And now you've got air in the system, and you need to be able to get the engine restarted. That's operator error, and that's where it's really important to learn these things and be comfortable with your labels, how you set it up, so that you have a good handle on that. And one tip that I like to say when I do seminars at Passage Makers Trawler Fest is that when you get something like a spare impeller and you're going to go on a trip, get 3 or 4, and if you still have a good impeller in there, which you probably do, take that one out, make that the spare, and put in one of your new ones that you bought, and make sure it's the right size. Put that one in, then you know that the spare that you pulled out is ready to go because it's already been in service and it's nothing wrong with it. But there have been people who bought spares, did this, and realized they had the wrong size. So before they took off, they were able to get it. And I think a lot of this stuff you just need to do at the dock. You can really learn a lot at the dock or locally at an anchorage away from the crowds, and sort of practice and again, build up those short steps walking before you start running.
That technique goes for belts as well. That's probably one of the areas more often than maybe any other spare part that doesn't fit when you need it. The belt you've had in stock for the last 2 years, when you go to use it, it doesn't fit. So I tell people, put that new belt on now, take the old one off, that becomes your spare, it fit. And I would say that I have an article called The Big Three, which will include in the
the Big 10 and the Big Three?
I have a Big Three one.
All right.
Top 10 and Big Three.
Oh, top 10.
And the Big Three is the things you absolutely positively need to know how to do as a boat owner. You don't need to be a mechanic. You don't need to be an electrician. You don't need to know everything, as Jeff said. But there's at least 3 things that you absolutely positively have to know. And those are being able to change the primary and secondary fuel filters on your engine and generator. And if it's the type of engine and generator that could need to be bled, that's not self-bleeding like a common rail engine, but a conventional pump line nozzle fuel injection system, then you also have to know how to bleed it, because invariably at some point you'll get air into that engine. So knowing how to do that is critically important.
Bleeding is getting the air out of it, right?
Yes.
Establishing the flow again.
Changing the impeller, as Jeff mentioned, and there are some things that go along with that, like the cam, which is part of the pump, and the cover plate. Those wear out. If you just keep changing impellers and you never change the cover plate in the cam, it's possible that it won't pump water at some point. And then being able to change belts. And on modern engines that use a serpentine belt, you typically need a special tool to compress the belt tensioner so that you can compress it and insert the new belt if the old one has broken. Or if you're just changing one that's damaged. And if you don't have that tool, it is veritably impossible to change the belt. Even if you have a spare, you cannot make that belt replacement. And the tool is not a proprietary tool. It's a breaker bar or ratchet handle. It's a square drive, but you need it to be big enough to compress that belt tensioner. So I tell my clients this routinely, especially if they're not technical people. You've got to learn these 3 skills first before anything else.
Well, and then you'd probably the multimeter would be
and multimeter, troubleshooting with a multimeter. Yeah, an understanding of electricity in general. Boats are very electrically intensive. Cruising boats are, and they're getting more so. So
I don't like electricity. I mean, I like what it does for me, but trying to I'm always afraid I'm going to shock myself. And there's some really basic things, breakers and fuses that, and again, a good diagram will help you know where to look for that.
Yeah.
Another tip that I've given in my Dialing in Your Trawler class is if you have fuses and they're the 300 amp or whatever with typically a plastic cover on it, you put a spare one right next to it so that if you diagnose that fuse has failed, you're not wondering if it's the 3rd drawer down in the galley where you have the spares. The spare is mounted nearby so you can make a quick change out.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'll use this opportunity also to share another resource that I have a lot of faith in, and that is a product called Wheelhouse.
Right.
Wheelhouse Technologies. That is a service or product that helps you maintain your vessel. It's veritably impossible for even the most knowledgeable boat owner or even a boat yard to know everything that needs to be done on every system or piece of equipment on a boat. I couldn't know that. If it was my own boat, there would be things that are called for by the manufacturers of each piece of equipment, service intervals and repairs or routine service that needs to be done that you just couldn't know about.
It's hard to keep track of all.
Combed through every manual and collated all that information. Wheelhouse Technologies does that for you, so they essentially get the model and serial number of every piece of equipment on the boat, from the engine to ventilation fans, and then plug that into a system that then alerts you about things that need to be done on either an hours or time, calendar basis. To me, I think that's an invaluable service. It's valuable to experienced boat owners as well as inexperienced people who don't have a lot of background with maintaining the systems and equipment on these boats, and it gives you a lot of confidence and peace of mind. And when the day comes that you sell the boat, if you have a Wheelhouse record that's up to date, meaning you've done everything that it's said needed to be done, it's very valuable as a sales tool. When I'm evaluating really a boat that has that product and it's up to date, I tell the buyer, well, there's probably going to be very little deferred maintenance that I'll encounter.
It shows the owner's paying
Wheelhouse
attention.
has been doing this.
So that was started by Barry Callender, who was a Nordam 40 owner and was just sort of a little bit overwhelmed by all this stuff. And he thought, there's probably a need for this. He talked to you about that, and you said never fly, right?
He did. He asked me to listen, hear him out with this pitch of this product that he had. And so we had lunch one day. And at the end of his pitch, I said, I think it's a great idea. I just don't think you'll ever be able to do it because the data entry will be overwhelming. It's so much information. But Barry is a former submariner. And so details are something that came naturally to him. And he created the product, ran with it. And 2 years later, I was very happy to write a very complimentary article about the product and say I was wrong. He was able to do it. And to this day, it's the only product that I intentionally or specifically rather endorse on my website.
Well, and Craig Parkhurst is now at the helm there, and he is a great resource. He's a great guy, and we'll put Wheelhouse's information up here on the screen so you can look into that a little bit as well. Going back to videos, I wanted to say something about Cliff Rome. Cliff has a Delta Marine 70. He's owned it for 25 years, I believe, maybe 30 years now. Thousands of miles on it, and he has recently started doing some videos about his cruising up in northern waters on the West Coast, up in Washington, up through Alaska. And I'll put the link for that right here. Those are some really interesting videos to watch. I think once you start getting into these things, you start tagging on to other similar types of videos that will help inspire you and help educate you on what it's like to go out there and do it. There's a lot of people who have done this, and I think the video makes it very easy to sort of absorb, digest, and consider what all is involved in doing something like being an owner-operator and taking your friends and family off on an adventure where you are enjoying the freedom and independence, but you have the responsibilities of taking care of everything. And it's not to be entered into lightly, but it is something that anybody can do with the right attitude, the right approach, and taking it basically slow and moving forward with a logical progression.
I would agree.
Yeah. Well, I think that was what we want to talk about on this conversation is, okay, you have the boat now, and how can you enjoy it the best? So you've got a little bit of an insight there. Steve, thanks for your time. We'll put a few of these things on the video for people to look at. You're welcome to get in touch with Steve. Steve, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
The website is stevedmarine.com. Email is steve@stevedmarine.com.
All right. And mine is jeff@jmys.com. I'll give you my cell phone number too because I live by that. It's 949-355-4950. You can call or text me. We love talking boats. It's just what we do. We're very fortunate to be in this business and have a career that allows us to support our families like this. So this has been a fun work retreat. We've had a good time away from the fray and being able to just enjoy some time together, talk about life, not just necessarily boats. But this is the last day. Tomorrow it's back to civilization. So I'm glad we were able to sit down and record a couple of tapes for people to hopefully get something out of.
Yep.
Steve, thanks a lot.
Agreed.
All right.
Jeff,
thanks.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good talking to you, Steve. Bye-bye. Hey, great to be underway again out on the water. Love it out here. Thank you very much for watching the video. We have a couple of things you can do. One thing is you can click the bell to get a reminder when we post the next video. We love it when you give us those thumbs up. And then you can subscribe by clicking the button below. Once you've seen a couple videos, you might also want to check out some of the other ones, so you can click on one of these videos on the side. Thanks. We hope to have you come back here soon, and we'll be putting up more content shortly.